Get serious. All right, we're in Bridge. We were looking at files. They are camera raw. The CR2 says, hey, I'm a camera raw file shot on a Canon. You have, I have the filter on that's allowing me to filter the file type. If I hit both of these or neither, it will show me the JPEGs and the RAWs. They're the same image, just different file types. This image is a raw file. It's 17.23 megs, and you can see that in the metadata. The JPEG is 4. So if I'm going to spend a lot of time editing, I'm going to use the raw file. Also, when you use a JPEG, things such as white balance and sharpening are automatically applied to the JPEG, and they are suggested to the camera raw in camera. But those settings can be changed in Camera Raw or Lightroom. Okay? So let's open up, let's just look at RAWs, and let's open up this one that's going to burn up the internet. So we have our warnings on. We have our shadow warning saying that this is going to be risking being pure black. We have our highlight warning on that says, hey, that's way too bright. And let's start at the top and look at our white balance options. We could leave it as shot, and the light was really good. If we hit auto, it's going to cool it down a little bit, and that's up to how we want it to look. If we go too far this way, you can see that the background gets yellow, and we don't want that. I can also go up to my option bar up here, grab the white balance tool, and click in the background and see if I can get a neutral reading. In this case, it went very blue. Maybe I can click on white in the shirt. That looks pretty good. So if we choose to warm him up a little bit, we can. And I think we could probably warm up a little without it being distracting. The next thing we do is if there's magenta or green. Don't see too much of that. Doesn't look magenta to me. It doesn't really look green to me. So I'm going to leave that at 0. Exposure is the midtones. Notice it's this part of the histogram. So if I adjust the exposure, it will affect that middle part. I think the image could use a little less light overall. So I'm going to take it down a little more than 1/4 of a stop. The contrast I don't adjust here. I adjust it in the next panel over in the tone curve. I like to go to the parametric or the point. The point is just like curves, so you can add some contrast there. In this case, even just that medium contrast I think is a little too dark. I'm going to go back to linear and zoom out. I'm going to leave that alone for now and play with the black and white values instead. Highlights will open up any areas that seem to be a little blown out. It affects this part of the histogram. This is the whites, highlights, midtone values, shadow values, and black. So if we pull this down a little bit, then we're going to get all of the exposure in his face. If we go this way, see how it's kind of bright? If we go this way, brings in a little more detail. Now the shadow area is what tends to get really dark. So let's try this. If we open up the shadows by dragging the shadow slider to the right, hit P before and after, it's giving us detail in our black. And if I open it up a little bit, I'm going to go down to the blacks and drag it to the left to make sure I have enough contrast and I have a nice rich black. You can turn off your shadow and highlight warnings because we're not really at any risk of that. Let's look at it before and after. Right? So it's really coming along. Whites you can drag this way to really affect this part of the histogram. That doesn't do anything good, I don't think. I might bring it a couple of points to the left to make sure we're getting all of the values in his face. And then for clarity, what clarity does is increases the mid-tone contrast. So it gives things kind of a punch. What I'm concerned about before I go too far with this is we were using 5,000 ISO. So at 100%, it's really noisy. All right, so let's go into our third panel over into sharpening and noise reduction. There are two types of sharpening, two types of noise reduction. One is luminance, which is black and white noise, and the other is color, which is like RGB noise. And you'll notice it in the shadows if there's color or if it's just kind of a black and white pattern. With this, I can definitely see the black and white noise. So if I drag this up from here, look at how it softens that, right? P is before and after. So you can see where it definitely softens that up. We can increase the detail or the contrast if we need to. I'm going to leave those pretty low because I don't really mind what it's doing. You don't want it to be mushy. Excuse me, and that's a little bit of a worry. But his eyes still look sharp, and I think that we can go in and target the eyes and give them a little more sharpness. So I'm zoomed into 100%. I'm going to increase that just a little more. I don't really see any color noise, to be honest. P is before and after. Yeah, it's getting nice. And I think I went a little too far because I don't want the face to get mushy, especially the eyes. Let's go back to the first panel. I can increase the clarity here, which is going to give it a little more pop. Clarity and sharpening and noise reduction can kind of work against each other, so it's kind of a delicate balance and a push and a pull. What I'm going to do next is select the targeted adjustment tool, which is, no, I'm not going to adjust. That is right here. And what the targeted adjustment tool does is lets you pick hue, saturation, luminance, or grayscale mix and actually select a part of the image and target just that part. And you'll notice that things are happening here. Okay. With that one. Saturation. And hue. So now he's green. What that's doing is affecting the HSL/grayscale panel, the fourth panel over. Now I'm going to reset all of that because I don't think his face looks that great with all of those adjustments. I think it's just normal human color, just fine. But you can also do a grayscale mix, which will convert it to grayscale and allow you to push and pull directly on the photograph. So you may not know which slider to use, but you can also hover over a part and just drag it up and down, and you can see the changes live. Next thing I'm going to do is get my adjustment brush, which is the K tool, I call it. Make the brush a little bigger, take the feather down just a little, make the brush smaller, zoom into the eyes, and I'm going to up the clarity. So I want it to just sharpen the eyes a little bit. You'll see what it does is places a pin, and you can see where the effect is being applied. You can also live update that with any of these additional tools. I don't think that one needs too much messing with. So I'm adding a little bit of clarity and just a tiny bit of exposure. I'm going to check P, and you can see it just gives the eyes a little more pop. Let's zoom back out and see if it's obvious, because if it's obvious, you don't want it. P is before and after. I don't think it's that obvious. I think you could probably increase the contrast a little in the eyes too, because the eyes are what we want to focus on here. Okay. I'm going to exit the adjustment brush by hitting K, K in and K out. You can adjust this pin at any time. You can add new pins, and you can also delete them. Okay. The next thing I might do with this, I'm going to go to the lens corrections or the FX. Let's do the FX. And I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette. Not too much where you're like, really? Did you add a vignette? It's super obvious.
Hey, Amy, I have a question. Oh, never mind. Because when I was doing the vignette, I was sliding it to the right instead of the left. And I was curious, like, why it's white. It's like it's not black.
That's why.
Yeah.
So that looks pretty good. I think that's looking pretty good. What do you think? Not sure I would do too much more to it. If we zoom in, Command plus to 100, and we hit P, you can see the before and after. Looks pretty good. I might pull a little bit of green out of the face. And to open this in Photoshop, as a smart object, which means I can come back and edit it at any time in Camera Raw, what do I do?
Shift.
Hold down the shift, open image, changes to open object. And then what am I required to do when I save this file?
The PSD.
Save it as a Photoshop document. Yep, because this is a layer. If you want to continue on with this file, if there's any retouching you would want to do, you could always add a new layer and do any retouching if there was like something on the background or like lint on the jacket. Looks pretty clean. But retouching would have to be done on an additional layer. You cannot retouch on this. If you go to, it will say, okay. If you want to do this, I have to be rasterized, and then you cannot go back into Camera Raw. So hit cancel. And then you would do that on a blank layer by changing the patch to content aware, loose, sample all layers. Okay? Which we are not going to do that. And then file save as PSD. And if you want to continue working on any of this, you absolutely can, but now you have the option of going back and editing Camera Raw.
And do you have any tips on